Nobody expected Kyle Busch's story to end this way. Just 1 week before his death, the two-time Cup Series champion was celebrating a Truck Series win at Dover, smiling in front of cameras and talking about the future like nothing was wrong. But according to Dale Earnhardt Jr., there were signs during Kyle's final days that now feel deeply unsettling in hindsight. When Dale Jr. finally revealed details about his last conversations with Busch, NASCAR fans were left shaken. He described a man who still wanted to race and still had plans ahead of him, but who also seemed more exhausted than people realized. And after hearing Dale's emotional words, many fans started looking back at Busch's final interviews and one chilling message he gave after his last win, a message that now sounds heartbreaking. Dale Earnhardt Jr. reveals details of Kyle Busch's last days. Dale Earnhardt Jr. is speaking publicly about the death of Kyle Busch, and his emotional words are giving fans a heartbreaking look at Busch's final days. What makes the tragedy even harder to process is that, according to Earnhardt, Kyle was still making plans for the future and showed no signs that his story was about to end so suddenly at just 41 years old. At the time of his death, no official cause had been publicly confirmed. However, reports suggested Busch had been struggling with a serious cough in the days leading up to his hospitalization. On May 10th, he reportedly visited a doctor complaining about what he described as a sinus cold and asked for a shot to help him recover. Just days later, his condition reportedly worsened, and on May 20th, Busch died after being hospitalized for what was described as a severe illness. He left behind his wife, Samantha, and their 2 children, while shocked fans and fellow drivers flooded social media with tributes. What made the news even more surreal was that only 3 days earlier, Busch had still been posting family moments online, but perhaps the most emotional revelation came from Dale Earnhardt Jr. himself. In a heartfelt post on X, Earnhardt reflected on the complicated relationship he and Busch had shared over the years. "Kyle and I had a really challenging existence for many years," Dale wrote, "but we luckily took the time to figure out our differences." Earnhardt admitted that while the 2 NASCAR stars had once been fierce rivals, Busch was actually the one who made the effort to repair their relationship. Over time, they began appearing together in media interviews, joking about old conflicts and putting years of tension behind them. Then Dale revealed something that left many NASCAR fans devastated. He said that he and Busch had recently been discussing the possibility of Kyle driving Dale's late-model car at Wilkesboro later this summer. In fact, they already had plans to meet the following Thursday to prepare Busch's seat for the car. "He seemed extremely happy," Dale wrote. "He laughed over the idea of his fans and JRM fans having to cheer in unison during that race. The radio call nobody thought twice about." On May 10th, Kyle Busch was racing in the Cup Series event at Watkins Glen, and for the first time in months, everything finally seemed to be going right. Driving the number 8 Chevrolet for Richard Childress Racing, Busch looked sharper and more competitive than he had all season. He was running inside the top 10, making aggressive moves through the field and reminding fans of the dominant driver they remembered from his peak years with Joe Gibbs Racing. Then, late in the race, Busch made a radio call that sounded completely ordinary at the time but now feels chilling in hindsight. Over the team radio, Kyle asked if someone could contact Dr. Bill Heisel from OrthoCarolina because he needed a shot after the race. His spotter calmly asked whether he wanted the doctor to meet him at the car or at the motorhome, and Kyle replied that he would meet him at the motorhome. The exchange was broadcast live during the Fox Sports coverage, and nobody reacted with alarm. Commentators simply explained that Busch had been dealing with a sinus cold throughout the week. Watkins Glen is one of NASCAR's toughest road courses, filled with elevation changes and heavy G-forces that can make even mild head pressure feel unbearable. To everyone watching, it sounded like nothing more than a veteran driver trying to push through a rough weekend. Kyle finished 8th that day, his best result of the entire 2026 season. Fans celebrated what looked like a long overdue turnaround, and the racing world moved on. But after his death on May 21st, that radio call suddenly took on a much darker meaning. What many fans did not realize at the time was that Dr. Bill Heisel was not just any medical staff member at the track. Heisel was one of the most respected figures in NASCAR medicine and had worked closely with Cup Series teams for years. Drivers did not casually ask for him by name unless they trusted him personally and believed something was seriously wrong. Kyle knew exactly who he was asking for. And perhaps the saddest detail of all was what else was happening that same day. May 10th was also the 4th birthday of Kyle's daughter Lennox. While his family was celebrating at home, Busch was sitting at a racetrack states away, quietly asking a doctor for help. The final win that feels haunting now. On May 15th, Kyle Busch arrived at Dover Motor Speedway for the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race and delivered the kind of performance that reminded everyone exactly who he was. From the moment the weekend began, Busch looked unstoppable. He qualified on the pole, swept both stages, led 147 of the 200 laps, and crossed the finish line more than 3 seconds ahead of Ty Majeski. It was his 69th career Truck Series victory, extending a record that many fans believe may never be broken. For one night, it felt like vintage Kyle Busch had returned. The frustration of recent Cup Series struggles disappeared, replaced by the confidence and dominance that had defined so much of his career. Fans celebrated. The garage celebrated. And Kyle himself looked genuinely happy to finally be back in victory lane. But it was what he said after the race that now feels impossible to forget. During his post-race interview with Fox Sports reporter Amanda Busick, Busch was asked why winning still meant so much to him after all these years. His answer sounded ordinary at the time, but after his death, those words suddenly took on a heartbreaking new meaning. "You take whatever you can get, because you never know when the last one is going to be," Kyle said. "So cherish them all." He smiled as he said it, sounding like a veteran driver reflecting on how difficult wins had become in recent years. Then, during another media session shortly afterward, a reporter asked how many more victories he still hoped to achieve before retiring. Once again, Busch repeated the same thought. You never know when the last one is going to be. Twice in the same night, only days before his death, Kyle Busch told the world to cherish every moment because nobody knows when it might end. At the time, nobody thought much about it. Drivers say emotional things after races all the time, especially veterans who understand how hard it is to keep winning at the highest level. There was no indication Kyle believed something terrible was about to happen. He was simply talking like a competitor who knew racing careers do not last forever. But context changes everything. Watching those interviews now feels completely different. What once sounded like a routine racing cliché now feels deeply unsettling to fans who know what happened only days later. The next day, on May 16th, Busch admitted to reporters that he still was not feeling well physically. He said the cough he had been dealing with the previous week remained pretty substantial, and that he still did not feel completely right. Yet nobody around him seemed alarmed. He had just dominated a race the night before. The last birthday, the last post, the final Tuesday. On May 18th, Kyle Busch was not thinking about racing headlines or championships. He was thinking about his son. That Monday, Brexton Busch turned 11 years old, and Kyle celebrated the occasion with what would become the final post of his life on social media. On Instagram, Kyle shared a series of photos showing Brexton growing up around racetracks, victory lanes, and family moments through the years. Alongside the pictures, he wrote about how proud he and his wife Samantha were of the young man Brexton was becoming. He said there was no limit to what his son could accomplish in life. At the time, it looked like a simple, joyful family post from a father celebrating his child's birthday. Now fans look at it very differently. Without anyone realizing it, Kyle Busch was unknowingly writing his final message to the world, What makes it even more heartbreaking is what Samantha Busch posted that same day. She wrote about watching Brexton grow into a driven, funny, and kind-hearted young man, calling motherhood the greatest gift of her life. She said that no matter how tall he became or how fast he learned to drive, he would always be her little boy. Those words were written during one of the happiest moments for their family. Only days later, they would carry an entirely different emotional weight. Then came Tuesday, May 19th. Kyle and Brexton traveled together to Durham, North Carolina for the grand opening of an Andretti indoor karting venue. Racing legend Mario Andretti was there greeting fans and sharing stories. But many people who attended later said their attention kept drifting toward Kyle and his son. Witnesses described the two laughing together, playing arcade games, and enjoying a rare moment away from the pressure of NASCAR competition. One attendee later recalled that Kyle seemed genuinely happy and completely present in the moment. He said watching Kyle interact with Brexton felt so personal and special that he did not even want to interrupt them for a photo. According to those there, Busch looked relaxed, smiling constantly as he spent time with his son. The next day, Mario Andretti himself reportedly showed reporters a video from the event of Kyle smiling and shaking his hand. Andretti later admitted the news of Busch's death left him stunned, calling it one of the biggest shocks he had experienced in racing. That was Tuesday. Kyle Busch was laughing with his son, surrounded by racing legends and fans. Less than 24 hours later, everything would change. The final tragic moments. On Wednesday, May 20th, Kyle Busch went to the General Motors Charlotte Technical Center in Concord, North Carolina for simulator work. For NASCAR drivers, especially those connected to Chevrolet teams like Richard Childress Racing, this was completely routine. Busch had spent years doing preparation sessions like this, working with engineers and testing setups for upcoming races. Nothing about that Wednesday initially seemed unusual, but late that afternoon, everything suddenly changed. Around 5:30 p.m., someone at the facility placed a frantic 911 call. When the audio from that call was later released by the Cabarrus County Sheriff's Office, it painted a far more serious picture than the sinus cold people had assumed Kyle was dealing with. The caller told dispatchers that a man inside the building was struggling to breathe, was extremely hot, and felt like he was going to pass out. Then came the detail that shocked NASCAR fans the most. Kyle was reportedly coughing up blood. According to the caller, Busch had collapsed onto the bathroom floor but was still conscious and responsive. Several times during the call, the caller emphasized that Kyle was still awake while urgently asking paramedics to arrive quickly. Emergency crews were directed to use a side entrance as they rushed into the facility. Busch was then transported to a hospital in the Charlotte area, though the exact hospital was never publicly identified. Looking back now, many fans see that 911 call as the moment everything changed. The cough Kyle mentioned at Watkins Glen, the shot he requested after the race, and the illness he downplayed at Dover suddenly seemed much more serious in hindsight. What people initially dismissed as a stubborn cold may have been warning signs of something far more dangerous already happening inside his body. By the following morning, the racing world woke up to devastating news. One of NASCAR's fiercest competitors, a driver who had seemed unstoppable only days earlier, was gone at just 41 years old. Severe illness. The two words that explained almost nothing. On the morning of May 21st, a statement appeared on Kyle Busch's social media accounts saying he had been hospitalized due to a severe illness and would miss NASCAR activities at Charlotte Motor Speedway that weekend. Shortly afterward, Richard Childress Racing announced Austin Hill would replace him in the Coca-Cola 600, while adding that Kyle's number 8 Chevrolet would be waiting for him once he recovered. But only hours later, the situation turned devastating. NASCAR, RCR, and the Busch family released a second statement confirming that Kyle Busch had died at just 41 years old. He was described as a future Hall of Famer, a once-in-a-generation talent, and a beloved husband, father, brother, and son. Yet when it came to explaining what happened, the public received only two vague words: severe illness. No hospital name was released, no exact medical condition was confirmed. Fans were left trying to understand how a driver who had been racing, smiling, and talking about the future only days earlier could suddenly be gone. At Charlotte Motor Speedway the next day, NASCAR executive Steve O'Donnell called Kyle an American badass and said the sport would honor him by continuing to race, because that was what Kyle would have wanted. But the most emotional moment came when O'Donnell revealed that Kyle had texted him just one day earlier, joking about creating an over 40 rule so he could race full-time in the Truck Series again next season. NASCAR executives had even discussed the idea internally on Wednesday, while Kyle was already collapsing inside a building less than 30 minutes away. Soon after, Richard Childress Racing announced that the number 8 car would be retired indefinitely, with the team saying the number would remain reserved for Busch if he ever chooses to race professionally. Tributes poured in from across NASCAR, but one silence stood out most. Kurt Busch, Kyle's older brother, never posted publicly. For many fans, that silence said everything. Kyle Busch won his final race on a Friday. He celebrated his son's birthday on a Monday. He spent Tuesday laughing with Brexton and shaking hands with Mario Andretti. He collapsed on Wednesday, and by Thursday, he was gone. Only 11 days separated a routine radio call at Watkins Glen from the moment NASCAR lost one of its greatest drivers forever. And perhaps the most haunting thing Kyle left behind were the words he repeated after his final victory. "You never know when the last one is going to be. Cherish them all."